Hi guys and welcome to my latest video. Now what we have here today is an all-in-one amplifier, Yamaha WXA-50. And when I say all-in-one, I mean it. It's basically an integrated amp with 70 watts power per channel for your speakers, but it also has integrated digital section, DA converter basically, but that's not all. It also has integrated streamer, so you can hook it directly to your home network and stream anything you want. And to do that, Yamaha did develop its own streaming app that you can download to your phone and navigate through all of its functions. And I'll talk about that more a little bit later. I'll talk about sound quality, of course, comparison with some closest competitors, but we have to start from somewhere, and I'll start with the build quality. I was actually quite nicely surprised by it. This is all metal build, and I believe that sides are made of steel, while the top and the bottom part are aluminum plates. Anyway, it feels really nice, it feels hefty. It weighs about 1.7 kilograms, and for such a small and basically thin, slim unit, that's quite a bit, and you feel it. The moment you take it out of the box, you feel it's high quality made. The only thing that screams otherwise is actually a remote. In a total contrast to the amplifier itself, the remote is very thin, very plasticky, and it actually looks the same as the one that I received with an RGB LED strip that I bought from AliExpress for about $7. It's remote controlled RGB LED light strip. It looked and felt very, very similar. That was for a $7 RGB LED. This is like $500 integrated amp by itself. Great build, lots of functionality, but the remote is a disgrace in my opinion. I will say that, I don't care. Yamaha, you should put a little bit more effort, and like I would gladly pay $5 more or even $10 more for this same unit with a better, more sturdy looking remote with buttons that don't feel squishy, and I'm never sure if I actually press them or not. Okay, remote aside, the unit itself has really nice quality, as I mentioned before. But let's talk about connectivity, because that's very interesting. And all of it is basically on the back panel. And first thing, looking from right to left, are binding posts. Now they're metal, they look very sturdy, they can accept bare wire, very thick wire too, banana plugs also, and it feels quite nice, quality made, everything's fine. Next to that, you'll find a lot of connections. For example, there is a subwoofer output, and here you see two pairs of RCA connectors. The left one is actually analog input for anything like CD player, Blu-ray player, whatever you want, but there is only one pair of analog RCA inputs. The other one is actually an output, so you can pass through line level signal to another device. But this next part is also interesting. First of all, let's get this out of the way. We have 12 volts triggers. I'm not going to talk about that. We have a switch to turn on or off Bluetooth, and yeah, you have Bluetooth connectivity. You just have to mount an antenna. It's somewhere in the box. The next connection I wanted to mention is USB here. Now this is not a digital signal input. It's not to connect your DAC or something like that. It's basically a storage connection. You can connect USB port or external hard drive and play your music files from there. Now, optical SPDIF input is also on board. Again, you can connect external DAC. I personally used it to connect my TV and watch some Netflix series. And the last one to mention is actually the Ethernet port, and that's if you're going to use the integrated streamer and digital section all together. And with that, we move to the front panel. There's not much to say here, really. You have your power on and off button, source select, pause, play, big volume knob. It has this sort of clicky feeling to it. It's also made of aluminum, as far as I can tell. Everything feels nice and functional. Of course, you also have a remote control that I previously mentioned. I know I trashed it a little bit, but it's really functional. It gets the job done. I just wished it was of a little bit better quality. Now, all of that out of the way, I'm quickly going to mention the app. Now, if you're going to use it as a streamer with its Wi-Fi connectivity or Ethernet connectivity, you have to download a so-called MusicCast. It's a native Yamaha app, and I'm opening it on my phone, but it's actually not loading because currently the amp is not connected to the network. But I'll get some screenshots for you, and the important thing to mention is that the UI is very clear, is very logical. The moment you open it, you're offered a device that you want to control. If you have several Yamaha devices, you can build a multi-room system basically, and you can control each room separately. But I just needed it to control this one amp that I was testing, and for that it worked flawlessly. I would just connect to it, and then you choose what will be your music source. It might be local storage, it might be internet radio. I tried listening few internet radios, everything worked just fine. You can use some streaming services like Spotify, Tidal, Deezer, Qobuz. Personally, I am a user of both Tidal and Qobuz. I connected both of them to the MusicCast. I was able to browse my favorite tracks, playlists, everything. UI is, as I mentioned, pretty clear, clean and functional, but it's also quite snappy. It works quickly, and all this time I was testing this amp, it never had any sort of problem or bug or anything that annoyed me. So I have to say I'm very happy with a Yamaha app. Everything just works as it's intended. But moreover, you have some options. If you go to sound settings, you can choose to use DSP, and then you can choose to adjust bass response, treble response, some few other options too. And if you want, you can choose direct mode, pure mode. I forgot how it's called, but basically that means you can override DSP function altogether. And that way you basically get the cleanest possible signal. Now, one important thing to mention is all these DSP functions. They can be used only if you use internal streamer. And that means if you're using Ethernet port for connection or Wi-Fi. Basically, if you use anything else, such as optical input or analog input, you cannot alter bass treble response on those inputs because you do not have hardware controls. You do not have analog bass and treble controls. Those are DSP. They mean those are a part of a streaming section. So they can only be used through streaming app. And now it's finally time I tell you more about its sound quality actually. And for that I first started my test using just its analog input. And that means I was using my own streamer, LODG1, with my own DAC, Denafrips Ares II, connected to analog input of Yamaha. And basically that way I just tested its amplification section. Now this is a Class D amp. It's ICE power, I think 125 modules and 70 watts per channel, as I mentioned. I tried it with several speakers, and I have to say that an impression of power, drive, and grip is really good. Even with my CAF LS50s that are somewhat fuzzy and difficult loads, Yamaha had great bass control, great grip. It was a punchy, involving, engaging sound, meaning that the sheer drive that you get from this amp and control over speakers is really good. And I'll start with bass region as usual. So bass notes feel punchy, but they're also very well controlled. There's a great grip over them. I never feel that Yamaha lets bass just go left and right and everywhere around the music. No, it's tight, it's disciplined, and because of that, when I listen to a double bass, for example, I hear a lot of texture. I hear a lot of that vibrating and creating that bass. And you don't always get to hear that with amps at this price point, so I was very happy with the bass response. Again, it was quite deep and punchy, but well controlled with a lot of texture. Perfect. And going up the frequency spectrum, we again have very detailed and crisp sounding mid-range. I feel that I can easily hear a lot of tiny details. Transients are very prominent. Edges are clean and crisp, and as I mentioned, tone texture is great. And if there's anything that I would complain about is that there's a slight feeling of dryness through all of that. I wish it was just a little bit more liquidy sounding, a little bit smoother sounding throughout the mid-range. But it's just a small complaint because it really has much more things to praise than to complain about. And highest frequencies are again very well extended with great resolution. So when we put all of that together, we are actually talking about an amplifier that's very precise, fast, grippy, with loads of details, with very prominent and clean edges and energetic transients. And it's tonally just a little bit on a dry side. But next I want to talk about soundstage. Now it develops quite wide soundstage, and it projects everything a little bit forward. There's a sense of presence and a sense of engagement coming from this amp. And you combine that with great dynamics. So this is a lively, snappy sounding amp. You have very nice dynamics, great control, wide soundstage, like slightly forward, energetic presentation, and also layering is great. I never felt that instruments and vocals are mixing and melting together. In that wide soundstage, everything is quite decently layered, and there's enough room around each of these instruments and vocal and everything. So all in all, I was quite positively surprised by this amp. And it's definitely one of the best sounding amps at this price point that I've ever heard. And if there's the only thing that I can complain about sound quality, that's it sounds slightly dry in the mid-range. But next I moved from my own setup that is basically more expensive than the amp itself to its internal DA section, and I used Yamaha's streaming app, and I was very positively surprised. What happened is basically that soundstage space, compressed just a little bit, and tone lost just a little bit of body and a little bit of fullness compared to my DAC, but basically everything I praised is still there. Just if you're using it like an all-in-one system, and that's probably what most of you will be using it like, it still sounds great. That wide soundstage that I mentioned, layering, great grip over bass notes, quick, speedy bass, a lot of texture dug from each tone, a lot of details, snappy dynamics, clean, crisp transients. Everything was still there. I still felt there's a little bit of dryness, but interestingly enough, if I actually engaged DSP mode in the MusicCast app, and I did nothing with bass or treble response, but there is just a button saying enhancer. And I don't know what it does. Yamaha claims it recovers lower quality files to its former glory, yada yada yada. I don't care about marketing talk. Usually nothing can actually recover a low quality file if it's a low quality to anything much better than that. But when DSP is engaged and that enhancer is engaged, Yamaha sounds just a little bit sweeter and a little bit fuller. And to my ears, that sounded really, really nice. And I actually ended up listening it that way. If I enable direct mode bypassing DSP, I was aware that everything became a little bit crisper. And maybe transients a little bit cleaner and more energetic, but that feeling of slight dryness would return. And I was really happy about that compromise. I would just engage DSP, leave that enhancer, whatever it is, on. And I do know, my brain tells me, but direct mode has to be better, cleaner, crisper, because it's just direct. It's uncolored, it's whatever. But I just prefer what I'm hearing with a DSP on. I don't know what that enhancer is doing, but everything sounds just a little bit more full-bodied, a little bit sweeter, and basically I did not detect that dryness anymore at all. So that leads me to one comparison, and just by chance I recently reviewed, and I still have it with me, NAD D 3020 V2. It's also a Class D amp. It's of a similar size, slightly narrower, but slightly thicker. In terms of build, NAD is more plasticky, Yamaha is metal. It just feels a little bit more sturdy and like it has nicer materials and everything. I do appreciate that. But when it comes to sound quality, I compared these two, and you can actually find a sound demo from the last week that you can listen for yourself with a good set of headphones or speakers and maybe try to notice some tonal differences. Maybe not, it's really tough over YouTube compression and your own gear. But what I actually hear in reality when comparing these two amps, okay, I'll just say it straight away. I do prefer Yamaha. First of all, it feels like it has more control over bass region. Bass feels neater and tidier. It's also slightly more punchy. It feels like it digs a little bit deeper, but it's also more controlled. It's tighter, it's neater. When I go to NAD, the bass line becomes just a little bit fuzzier, and especially the mid bass is slightly more bloomier, and it gives everything slightly softer presentation. It's not as precise and as neat. Mid-range is actually very similar. Tonally, these are very similar amps. I feel that the level of details is quite comparable when it comes to mid-range. Maybe NAD is a little bit smoother sounding because of that upper bass region that is warming things just a little bit, while Yamaha is a little bit more precise and textury. And highest spectrum, I would give that to Yamaha. It's like a clear win. It just extends higher, there's more air around the instrument, there's more atmosphere from the recording that you can hear. It feels like NAD rolls off quicker. It's not as bright, which might suit some of the speakers really nice if you have like bright, open, forward-sounding speakers. But with like 3 sets of speakers that I tried these with, I always preferred Yamaha slightly. This continues when I'm talking about dynamics. Yamaha sounds snappier. It's somehow always livelier sounding. In terms of sound staging, it's a little bit more forward, while NAD is a little bit more laid back. in terms of presentation, but it doesn't mean that it creates deeper soundstage. It doesn't have that scale, that depth. Both have pretty much similar depth. It's just that with Yamaha everything is a little bit forward. With NAD it's more laid back, but everything goes together. Like it's either forward or it's either laid back. You don't gain more depth and more three-dimensionality because of that with NAD. And I guess this will boil down to your personal preferences. Do you like something that's more in your face or something that's more laid back? But that said, when it comes to actual layering, I again feel that Yamaha is slightly better. Like there's more empty space around instruments. It puts every musician and vocal more firmly in its place, and like there's more empty space between them. With NAD, you feel like everything is a little bit closer, slightly more congested. The whole scene is just not as well spread and separated as with Yamaha. Now don't get me wrong here. It might sound like Yamaha obliterated NAD. It's not what's going on. They're both quite good amps. And in isolation, I didn't find much to complain about NAD. It actually sounds tonally even. It's slightly on the warmer side due to that upper bass presence. Now, everything I'm mentioning here is a small difference, but in my opinion, a lot of small victories for Yamaha, and if I were to choose one of these for myself, I would go with it. Now, if you already have NAD, it's not a huge difference. It's not something that you should immediately be like, oh, I'm selling this and I'm buying this one. Don't do that. They're quite close. This is still quite decent amp. I made a review about it, I liked it, I still like it. I mentioned in that review that it paints a picture in slightly broader strokes. Yamaha is a little bit more technical, more snappy, more precise. Personally, I prefer that. That leads me to pairing, actually. If you have a very analytical sounding speakers, you might easily prefer NAD. Let's say, for example, monitor audio comes to mind. Monitor audio bronze or silver that I've heard. They're very competent speakers, but they're upper mid-range forward speaker. They're technical, slightly analytical, they do not have much bass weight. If you combine them with Yamaha, everything could be too thin and too edgy and without tone body. So I heard a lot of monitor audio NAD combinations that sounded great. I wouldn't pair those speakers with Yamaha. Probably same thing would go for B&W speakers. They tend to sound slightly aggressive. I again probably wouldn't intentionally combine Yamaha and Bowers & Wilkins. But for a lot of speakers, ranging from neutral to warm, let's say KEF Q series, or Wharfdales, or Q acoustics, basically anything that is either neutral or slightly warm, I would rather pair it with Yamaha and get a little bit more of that layering, liveliness and extension in high frequencies. And finally that punchier but also better controlled bass line. And all of that said, I think I provided enough material about Yamaha. It's been on the market for a few years now, but it's still selling. And it's still a great amp in my opinion. And even the digital section, streaming section, that one might think, yeah, it's a few years old device, this might be like outdated, it works great. With high resolution files, with everything I tried. It's a really versatile all-in-one system. And I started thinking about this. In my country, this is like 500 euros. I think I saw on Amazon currently it's 550 US dollars. And I was thinking, if I was to spend that amount of money on separates, like integrated amplifier, external DAC, and external streamer, there's no way I would get this sound quality. I just can't see it. If I have to divide the similar amount of money on 3 separate devices, and then even spend some of that budget on 2 sets of cables, like you would first have to use digital cable from your streamer to your DAC, then interconnect cable from your DAC to your integrated amplifier. And no matter how I combined that budget into 3 separates, there is no way that those could sonically match what Yamaha is offering. And I think that's probably the most important conclusion here. And if you actually decide to go that other way, be sure it's because you know that you're going to upgrade those devices. Because if you just have 500 or 600 euros or dollars and you want to spend them now and then not upgrade anything for few years just to enjoy that system, I'll say this, there is no way that you can buy 3 separates that will sound nearly as good as this Yamaha on its own with its integrated system. Now just add a pair of capable speakers and you'll have a really great hi-fi system on a budget. And on that note, I'm ending today's review. Now, if you liked the video, please click that button. If you really liked it and you like the work I'm doing here on this channel, then consider becoming a patron maybe. Big thanks to the guys that are patrons already. You help a lot. Even if it's small amount of money, it means a lot. And that would be all for today. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.